The idea of having the main character killed and then reincarnated as a totally new person in a new world isn't something new in anime, and I'm pretty sure we're all quite familiar with it by now unless you have been living under a rock. Of course, this particular anime trope has been done so much that most of this type of shows have just become trashy parodies at this point, but there are occasionally some very interesting stories that can come out of the trope itself, and that anime is called Youjo Senki. So hear me out, imagine an anime about a modern day salaryman from Japan being reincarnated as a little orphan girl in an alternate timeline which blends magic with World War I geopolitics and World War II technology, while there's a godlike being constantly making her life a living hell so she would become a believer of God. Okay, I know the overall synopsis might sound a bit messy and the concept seems to be quite gimmicky, and yeah, I agree, it's hard to understand what the hell is going on at first glance, but it definitely gets more complex as we learn more about the philosophical and political affairs of the show itself.
はじめまして。私は白銀、ターニャ・デグレチャフで。
So the aforementioned salaryman originally was quite a douchebag, possessing the mentality of a pragmatic corporatist. He lacks any sympathy for the workers that he has to lay off and only consider how he can benefit the company so he can climb the corporate ladder and eventually live an easy and peaceful life. It was all going according to his plan, that is until he was pushed onto the train tracks by someone he had laid off the very same day. In the final moments of his death, time suddenly froze and he is confronted by a being that claims to be God, or also known as Being X. Being X was unhappy that humans have lost the morals instilled to them by the universe and their lack of faith has become a concern. But given that the man is an atheist, he rejected the being's existence from both a realistic and rational point of view and explained how he sees no need for the concept of God in his life. Being X was not impressed by his defiance, and as punishment, the being decided to have the protagonist be reborn into a world where there was no safety because, as he put it, only when faced with dire straits, humans would finally have faith. Thus, he was reincarnated as a young girl named Tanya Degurechaff into an alternate timeline where the world is about to be plunged into the very First World War. Although she is a child, Tanya was blessed with an incredible amount of magic which got the attention of the Imperial Army. Thinking she can use this to her advantage and climb the ranks of the meritocracy in order to secure herself a comfy desk job, she enlists herself in the military but finds herself closer and closer to the death she so desperately tries to avoid. But in spite of the bad situation she finds herself in, she doesn't plan to give up her fight against Being X, which really helps to give us an insight into her character's psyche and personality. So basically the crux of the series is just Tanya trying to survive in this alternate world while not succumbing to Being X's efforts to make her a believer. Now I'm sure some people might be disgusted with an anime showing basically a child soldier fighting in a war, but I would first like to say that this can be fully explained within the lore of the series itself. Essentially, the Imperial Army exists as a strict meritocracy with little concern for the gender or age of soldiers they recruit, and with Tanya retaining her memories as an adult living in the 20th century, you can see why she would be easily accepted into the army with her skills and knowledge. That said, do note that the show isn't all action, blood and war, as it also has a lot of interesting perspectives on the human nature of war, philosophical arguments, and the geopolitical strategies that go into it. Especially when it comes to the setting of the show and how it does a good job at reflecting our own world, except for the magic part of course. Not to mention how the show is able to portray the way different countries would act when they are disagreeing and the way it employs realistic tactics on the battlefield. I mean, even the real-world comparisons of different nations in the show were quite spot on. They were definitely not trying to hide where they got their inspiration from. Having the Empire be compared to World War I Germany, the Republic basically being France, and the Allied Kingdom is just, well, you guessed it, the United Kingdom. Even the way they showcase how patriots or soldiers of a nation can blindly believe the propaganda given to them or simply following orders is an aspect that is very realistic and that it actually does happen in our own world as well. Of course, it's not a one-to-one carbon copy of all the nations with certain elements that are still different from their real-world counterparts, but it certainly does help add a sense of veracity to the show. And honestly, I consider the world building and lore of Youjo Senki to be quite unique, although one of the issues with the series is that they aren't really explored beyond the initial presentation we are given. At face value, I know we're not supposed to root for the Empire because they are this imperialistic force that is trying to invade other nations, but because of the lack of context into the history and cultural values of the Empire, the Republic, or even the Allied Kingdom, it can sometimes feel hard to determine who is actually at fault. World building and lore aside, Youjo Senki is a military anime after all, so it goes without saying that it would have a few underlying themes, whether it's related to philosophical, political, or even personal beliefs. And one of these themes the anime is trying to deliver is definitely that sometimes you should have empathy for others even if it's not out of your own compassion. Because regardless of how logical you are or how rational your approach is to any given problem, you have to always take the other party's feelings into consideration, as sometimes it will cause unforeseen negative consequences, like say being pushed onto a train track by a disgruntled employee. Additionally, I do find that the series is also a good examination of the old argument between determinism and the idea of free will. The former says that one set of action is possible and nothing can change that, while the latter says all results are the sum of the choices made by individuals. Through Tanya and her struggle against being X, their dynamic makes it so that no matter what decisions Tanya makes, they are always going to lead to her being forced to pray to being X until she eventually becomes a devout believer of God, or either she's killed. This is why her character makes the show more enjoyable to watch, and her character is always the one that steals the spotlight from the show thanks to her crazy personality and skills. Since she retained her sociopathic and libertarian personality from her previous life, she is focused on fighting against being X in every way possible, while at the same time taking advantage of others to help her rise rapidly through the ranks of the military. In fact, she provides a fascinating case study on villainy, but far from the typical cliché ambitions of world domination, fame, or riches. In the end, her ultimate objective is to simply live out a comfortable life by abiding the rules set by the world and being a competent member of society. Yeah, it seems like a mundane goal, but it helps add realism and ground her character to be more relatable. Indeed, her greatest downfall is the contradiction of her final goals, ideology, and actions within the military environment, resulting in the various schemes that she cooks up to ensure a comfortable position always ends up with the opposite effect. Her adherence to rules, regulations, and orders never allow for any alternate route in spite of Tanya being the villain in her own story. While the civilian business world can be far more accommodating to the desires of talented individuals like Tanya, but because the military values competence, she is allowed to have more responsibility and earn greater rewards through them quicker. That said, when it comes to the other characters, sadly it's only Tanya that gets to shine in the series, and most side characters of the show don't even come close to holding a candle to the flamethrower that is Tanya, but that doesn't mean that they are poorly constructed. In fact, there are some focus on Tanya's 203rd Aerial Mage Battalion, especially on Victoria Serebiakov. I'm so sorry if I butchered her name. She's a female soldier conscripted into the Imperial Army and served alongside Tanya for the longest. That's why she seems to understand Tanya the most and even believes that the way Tanya treats her subordinates is just her own form of tough love. She also acts as the foil to Tanya's cold-efficient and utilitarian worldview, but she does have her own nationalistic ideals, a strong sense of duty like Tanya, and would worry about the well-being of her comrades. It is this juxtaposition of their dynamic that makes their interaction so peculiar to watch, and I wish we got more out of her character in the anime. But I guess that's unavoidable because I think the story still hasn't progressed far enough to give her or any other side characters more development. Like I said, Youjo Senki is a series about war, so when there's action, you can definitely feel the effort put into the fight scenes and how it was choreographed. Being an anime done by Studio Nut, a lesser-known company that is made up of former Studio Madhouse employees, there is obviously some talent behind the anime production as the action sequences look quite good and convey a sense of intense ferocity as Tanya easily butchers her way through any and all enemies standing between her and a peaceful life. War elements are incorporated with realistic looking guns, slick uniform designs that fit the time period, and the overall aesthetic of the world, especially how the color palette is used to depict the bleak tone of the show. Still, the most noticeable part about the show is definitely Tanya herself. She may look harmless, but when you see how the show depicts her while fighting, then she turns into a ruthless demon child. The way they would use expressive animation to bring out Tanya's psychotic personality to its fullest while letting us feel the most impact out of everything she does, and it's not uncommon to witness her sadistic expression when she goes on a rampage. The eyes, the mouth, and the brows, they all move so well and contort in such beautifully horrifying ways that it even feels reminiscent of the utterly creepy and mesmerizing hand movement animations from Konosuba, and I honestly have to give them props for it. Anyways, at first glance, Youjo Senki might appear as just another quirky and gimmicky isekai series that plays simply on the shock value of, oh look, a sadistic loli committing war crimes. But when you immerse and engage yourself in the taste of Carlo Zen's bizarre world about the horrors of war, the supernatural influences, and violently intense combat, you'll be able to find that there's a deeper theme the show is trying to portray. Of course, it's not perfect, marred by a few creative and writing issues, but it does justify itself as a series worth checking out. And even then, it still depends on how people wish to interpret it because, like I said, Tanya is the one that mostly makes Youjo Senki so interesting, and not everyone will like her and the overall idea of the series. Youjo Senki is definitely something special, and with season 2 being announced, I'm sure it will only get better as we see what other trials await Tanya.
どこかに児童相談所でもないものか。
That said, I do hope you enjoyed the video and feel free to let me know your thoughts on Youjo Senki or even the character of Tanya herself. Be sure to like the video, subscribing to the channel and hitting that notification bell for more anime reviews. Thanks for watching and as always, stay safe everyone.